Welcome. This is the first episode of an experiment I'm trying in journalism, a real-time and hopefully crowdsourced investigation into the murder of Haing Ngor. Haing Ngor was a doctor, a political activist, and an actor. He won an Oscar for his role in The Killing Fields, the movie released in 1985. He played the part of Dith Pran, the Cambodian reporter for The New York Times. Dith Pran worked alongside correspondent Sidney Schanberg covering the takeover of Cambodia by the Khmer Rouge guerrilla group in 1975. The Killing Fields in part tells the story of the press and a few thousand Cambodians holed up in the French embassy as the Khmer Rouge began their forced evacuation of Phnom Penh. After several days of extraordinarily intense negotiations, foreigners were allowed by the Khmer Rouge to leave, traveling overland to Thailand in trucks. Dith Pran was among the thousands forced to stay. One reason Haing Ngor, who'd never actually acted before, performed so well in the movie is that Ngor also escaped the Khmer Rouge, eventually settling in the U.S. as a refugee in Los Angeles. He told his own heartbreaking story of losing his wife and unborn child in the Khmer Rouge period in his memoir, A Cambodian Odyssey. So who are the Khmer Rouge? In the 1970s, communism was trending. By April 1975, next door in Vietnam, the fall of Saigon was fast approaching to communist North Vietnam and their fighters, the Viet Cong. The international press in Vietnam famously dubbed Cambodia the sideshow to the main news story of the day, the American folly in Vietnam. Cambodia endured its own share of American folly, unfortunately with catastrophic results. This is a depressingly familiar set of moves that people will recognize from other places that the U.S. and the CIA have dabbled. First, the U.S. orchestrated a coup d'etat in 1970 to install in Cambodia a friendly government. President Nixon then sidestepped Congress entirely and illegally invaded Cambodia from Vietnam. The goal was to look for Viet Cong bases over the border. As Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger spearheaded a mission to carpet bomb Cambodia. The goal was to destroy supply lines used by North Vietnam to supply the fighters further south. Those supply lines, known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, crisscrossed in and out of Cambodia. Not surprisingly, Cambodia turned away from the U.S. and everything it stood for. Many joined forces with the Khmer Rouge, headed by its rarely seen leader, Pol Pot. In a very broad sense, you can think of the Khmer Rouge as the ISIS of the 1970s. ISIS took territory across Syria and Iraq and tried to create what they called a, quote, pure Islamic state. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge tried to create, quote, a pure communist state. Their inspiration was Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China in 1966, and the idea was a classless society based on agriculture. But there's no such thing as political purity, so just like ISIS and Mao's Red Guards, the Khmer Rouge were breathtakingly violent. They forced every single Cambodian out of the cities and into the countryside to farm. Former officials, the wealthy, educated people who wore glasses, people whose hands were too soft, revealing that they weren't actually a peasant farmer, all got executed. The results, as I said, were catastrophic. The most conservative estimates put the number of dead at 1.7 million, from disease, forced labor, starvation, torture, and execution. Other estimates go as high as 5 million. The Khmer Rouge were eventually forced from power in 1979 because Vietnam invaded. But Pol Pot is up there with Mao, Stalin, and Hitler as one of the worst war criminals of the 20th century. Let's turn to Los Angeles in 1996. Haing Ngor was murdered in what looked like a gang robbery gone wrong. His Rolex was stolen. But he reportedly refused to give up a locket he wore on a gold chain containing a photo of his late wife. 3 members of the LA gang, the Oriental Lazy Boys, went to prison for killing him. The FBI said there was no political connection to Ngor's murder. But there are a lot of unanswered questions. Why didn't the Lazy Boys take Ngor's wallet, which was filled with cash? The gang was known for carjacking, so why didn't they take Ngor's Mercedes? At this point in 1996, the Oscar-winning Ngor was an activist and he was well known. He was pushing for an international war crimes tribunal to hold the Khmer Rouge accountable for the millions they killed. It's important to realize that in 1996, the Khmer Rouge were still active. They were removed from power in 1979, but that just started a civil war. In 1996, the Khmer Rouge were isolated and a mere fraction of the force they were in the 1970s. But they still had pockets of territory, and they punched above their weight in terms of propaganda. Back in the 1970s, 80s, and into the 1990s, shortwave radio was absolutely huge. I used to work for Voice of America, where it was said, CNN is heard in the boardrooms, VOA is heard in the rice paddies. In the developing world, before internet and cell phones were a thing, when most people were far too poor to have television sets, shortwave radio was the absolute king. Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge's mysterious leader, had not been seen by outsiders since 1978. But KR radio haunted Cambodia's airwaves with propaganda broadcasts. The Khmer Rouge were constantly denouncing their enemies and pushing the narrative that they'd soon return to power. That's why some believe Haing Ngor's murder was a political assassination ordered by Pol Pot. But there are other possibilities. Perhaps he was murdered by someone else who would be threatened by both the Khmer Rouge Tribunal and Ngor's growing popularity among the Cambodian expatriate community in Long Beach, outside Los Angeles. Maybe it really was just a robbery. My name is MP Noonan. I'm a journalist and former foreign correspondent. I got my start in Cambodia in the early 1990s, and since then, I've worked for Voice of America, NPR, CBC, the BBC, and numerous other news outlets, and I've often used Patricia Noonan as my byline. I'm still connected to many friends and colleagues I met when starting out in journalism in Cambodia, so I'll be reaching out to them and anyone else who might be able to shed light on the murkiness surrounding Haing Ngor's murder and other unanswered questions. This is a crowdsourced podcast I'm trying, meaning if anyone knew Haing Ngor personally and would like to contribute, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any information or details that you think might be relevant to Haing Ngor's murder, please reach out. The best email is whokilledhaingnor@gmail.com. Haing is Haing, Ngor is Ngor. Thanks for listening.